Good morning, everybody. Wisconsin farm boy, writer, and consultant who tells the hidden stories of rural America in columns for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and other publications across the country, Brian Reisinger is my very special guest today, Thursday, July 6th, 2023. Quick special thank you to Shell Lake Police Chief and Washburn County Board Chair Dave Wilson, who filled in for Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald on this week's Positive Tuesday with Ben and Fitzy show. In case you missed that, you can watch a recording of that show and a recording of all of our live shows on our website at DrydenWire.com, right here on our Facebook page and our videos tab, or we store all of our videos, recordings on our YouTube channel, just youtube.com/DrydenWire. Fitzy will be back for next week's Positive Tuesday show, and 1 week from today, July 13th, we welcome back for his monthly show on DrydenWire's 7th Congressional District Representative, Congressman Tom Tiffany. But today, we welcome, for the first time on the show, a man for whom I both respect and hold in very high regard. A man I am honored to call my friend, Brian Reisinger. Brian, good morning, brother. How are you?
Good morning, man. I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Pretty well. It's early where you are. I mean, it's early now here, but and I know you're a Wisconsin boy, but right now you're in Pacific time or something. You're like 2 hours behind. It's like 6:30 in the morning.
It is. It's 6:30. I was up at 5 doing a little writing. I think you and I share the fact that, you can't get a damn thing done after about, 7, 8 o'clock once everybody else has their clutches on you, right? So,
yeah, I know.
Yeah, been up since 5 here, 7 your time, and no big deal for a farm boy, but happy to be here.
Oh,
great way to start the day.
I know. I'm so excited. And I was thinking this morning, how long have I known you? And I can't put a year. I think it was 2018. Oh, and you know what? So, first time you've been on the show, so obviously we want to get to know you and all the things. You're an incredibly fascinating individual. But I realized this morning that you were actually, and I don't think I've ever told you, or I don't think I've even shared this story publicly anywhere for no particular reason, it just never came up. You were actually instrumental in doing live shows. You were the one that got me to the point of, I should do these things live. You were on a campaign, if I remember, this was, again, 5-6 years ago, maybe 2018-ish. You were on a campaign for a statewide, a candidate running for a statewide race, and I got connected with you. We have a mutual friend out in D.C. and connected us, and it was for an opportunity for me to interview your boy, your candidate, right?
Yeah. This is with the governor. So this is the origin story for DrydenWire's live show.
That's right. Yeah,
let's hear it.
Yeah, with Scott Walker. Yeah, and so we set this all up. We had some conversations, and then I think you guys were like touring around on a bus or something. And so then you were calling and saying, okay, it's about now. No, not right now. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. So we were doing this back and forth, and then finally, so I had the chance to talk to Governor Walker, and it was about a 20, 25-minute long conversation. Sorry. Good morning, Brian. I missed you there. So I recorded it, and that was the idea, right? So I downloaded an app to record it. And when I was finished, I'm like, all right, I'll just transcribe it, I guess. So I put my earbuds on, and holy cow, that's a nightmare. Like just sitting, listen to it, type, rewind 10 seconds, type, rewind 10 seconds, type. Took like 3 hours.
Yeah.
It was a privilege to have Governor Walker on, but the whole process was like 5 or 6 hours. We talked later that afternoon, and you had asked, how did it go? Everything good? Do you need anything else from me? And I'm like, no, it went fine. Just took a while. And you had said, and this is it, you planted the seed right there. You said, too bad people couldn't just listen to that conversation. And I kind of dismissed it. I'm like, yeah, too bad. Whatever. It is what it is. That night I was laying in bed, and it's, man, he's right. Maybe we should do that. That's like a podcast, right? Well, then I have to like post-production stuff of a podcast, and could you edit that one part out? I didn't like it, and I don't know. I'm kind of lazy. I'm sorry. My therapist says I should use the word efficient. We agree to disagree on that one. And I'm like, well, maybe like a live podcast. Well, I don't think that's a thing. And there's, it'd be better. What about like people get to watch the phone conversation? And skipping 6 months later was our first show, and now we've done well over 300, and you're on. So this is bringing it all full circle. You are the reason for DrydenWire live shows.
I had no idea that words from my mouth had anything to do with all this success. It just shows you, one man's village idiot is another man's prophet. So I'm
Nice.
uh I'm pumped that you guys are doing this, man. The show is awesome. And
Awesome.
it's such an important conversation I think that you guys have, particularly for the northern part of the state. And that was our thought when we got talking with you, years ago. And I think that's what you're really doing with this and with your website is making sure that people get information, people get conversation, in a part of the state that isn't as served by as much media as places like
Yeah.
Milwaukee or Madison or other parts of the country.
All right. So we need to set some ground rules.
Yeah,
You get to compliment us one time per show.
I've
You
burned it
just
already in the
you
first five
just
minutes.
burned it up, and you get 2 swear words per show. Now that's not a quota. You don't have to.
Where are we
I,
at? Am I
I
already?
think you already used one, so, so
All
you
right,
get one more.
the next one's gonna be really really well spent. So don't worry.
Okay, and after
Yeah,
that, you have to I don't know donate to a nonprofit of an organization that you don't support, like $10
yeah. Well,
that you
that I
don't
mean,
support.
with your guests, that might drive a lot of philanthropy. I don't know.
All right, obviously I just shared that story about how you and I got to know each other. But let's get to know you. For most other people, obviously don't know you, at least up here in Northwest Wisconsin. And I think a lot of that's kind of by design. You've always been that behind the scenes kind of a person. So let's literally just start from the beginning. Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, yeah. I grew up on a dairy farm in Sauk County, southwestern part of the state, about an hour west of Madison. And, it was the kind of dairy farm that you don't see very much of anymore. 50 cows, small, couple hundred acres, and is kind of a little bit of a disappearing way of life. And I loved it. I appreciated it growing up, but I was no good with tractors or animals. I could figure out how to string words together now and then, so I thought I would try that. And so that's where I grew up. And then from there, I mean, I don't know if you want me to go into my whole deal from there, but
Well, yeah, I mean,
it
we've
was
got 40 more minutes. Uh,
perfect.
so after high school, what did you do after high school? And maybe more importantly, did you know when we're always told, you and I are roughly the same age. I think you're a little younger,
Yeah.
but you're told 11th, 12th grade, you pretty much have to know what you want to do for the rest of your life.
I,
Did you know at that point what I want
I
to
was
do?
I was really rare. I mean, it's evolved over the years, but I was really rare and lucky. I had some teachers who helped me focus on some things in River Valley High School back in Spring Green, Wisconsin. And I figured out that I could write. I figured out that I enjoyed history and what was going on in the news. And basically, I was a little better at writing and talking than I was at fixing and milking cows. And I had teachers that fostered that. And so by the time I was sophomore, junior, or so, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and that pretty quickly evolved in its first stage into journalism. So after I graduated from high school, I went to UW Eau Claire, which is known for a lot of good things, but one of the things it's known for is journalism program. And up in Eau Claire, I studied journalism for 4 years, and I started working for newspapers when I was 19. So I got a job at the Waunakee Tribune, one of the smaller weekly newspapers you'll find in the state. I'm a proud alum of.
Where's that
And
out of? That's not out of Eau
yeah,
Claire. I lived in Eau
yeah.
Claire for many years.
Yeah, this was on summers when I was back and stuff for break.
Got
And
it.
so Waunakee is kind of outside of Madison. It's one of those small towns that's surrounded by farmland, but isn't too far from Madison. And so they've been growing a lot last couple of years. By the time they were pretty small. So I wrote for the Waunakee Tribune, and then the summer after that, it was the Baraboo News Republic, which is the county seat of my home county, Sauk County. And then not too long after that, I started writing for the Eau Claire Leader Telegram, which is the daily newspaper up there. I used to get up at 5 in the morning, go out there and write obits, and every once in a while they let me write a feature story about somebody or call the
I was
police
just going
station.
to ask, what are you? So you're writing for them,
Yeah,
but what are you writing? Do you have assignments back then, right? Or sports or a bitch, whatever?
yeah,
Was it
yeah,
more? I could kind of write what I wanted. Was there a difference between one? If you just named 3 different news outlets,
yeah.
what was the difference between them? What did you write about?
At the Leader Telegram in Eau Claire, my third newspaper job, they had a lot of college students coming in, so you kind of had to fight for scraps and earn your keep. And so I used to do obits and all kinds of routine stuff, fill out calendars. But if you were hungry and you did a good job, they'd also let you write stories. You write around town features, the things going on around town. You'd cover local government meetings, stuff like that. But one of the things that was really cool about the other papers I worked at, Leader Telegram was great. It was the first, good sized daily I got a chance to write for. But the smaller papers I did before that, what was so cool is, man, they didn't have huge news staffs, didn't have a ton of resources. And they were like, hey, you're a 19-year-old kid, you don't mind talking to people, you can maybe write halfway. Go cover anything, whatever you want. And so I would cover all kinds of things. They would assign me things, but I also cover things that I came across. I think it was my second story ever. One of my first stories, anyway, was about the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile Museum
Yes.
that this guy had in his basement in southern Wisconsin. When I got to Baraboo, I wrote a lot about Circus Row Museum. I actually met the Happy the Clown, like the original Happy the Clown. I came and sat with
No.
him in his house, and he's like, kind of in a later part of his life, and there's like figurines of him all over his house. I mean, it's just crazy, interesting stuff about local communities and that kind of thing. And then when I got to Eau Claire, you got the chance to cover bigger news because you were in a bigger city, but you also were doing kind of the dregs, whatever they would throw your way. And I did that all through college. I also wrote for the student newspaper. UW Eau Claire has a great student newspaper, The Spectator, and you get a chance to get some really good experience there. And that all set me up to be able to write for the Wausau Daily Herald. So, a paper that somewhat covers your region of the state. I know
Yeah.
they're number of many miles south of you, but they're kind of at the edge of the Northwoods there. And so I lived there for 2 years after college, and I wrote there before I left Wisconsin
So
for a
what did
little
you
while.
get your degree in? I'm sorry, that was
Yeah,
presumptuous. I'm assuming you
yeah,
have the
yeah,
degree, but
yeah. Right. Well, you never know. I mean,
well,
that could have
yeah, I
been
mean that was
that could have been my second swear word, and it's only the first 10 minutes. Yeah, I got a 4-year degree. I studied journalism as my major and political science as my minor. Political science is one of the more worthless things you can study. People who study it will tell you that, but it was interesting and it
well.
fit
Slow
well with
down.
journalism.
We can't gloss over that. Why do you say that?
Yeah, it's like people people in this world, I think the people whose work is most valuable are the people who make things, the people who grow things, that kind of stuff. And as you get into education, I think you have to be aware that what you study should hopefully do something for your community, hopefully allow you to do something meaningful if you can. And politics is one of the things that is so important, but the way that politics is played out can be so meaningless. And so the study of politics, if you're not careful, can be pretty meaningless too.
Mm,
And there are certainly people who've studied political science who've gone on to do great things, including the study of or participation in politics. But man, is it easy to just sit there and you kind of yam around about politics and not do anything about it.
mm.
So anyway, you gotta be careful with that one.
So you're in Wausau for a couple years after graduating with your
Yeah,
degrees, and what was after that? Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah.
What did you write for when you were there?
Yeah, so in Wausau, I started on the night cops beat. So it was 2 to 10 p.m., Tuesday through Saturday. Took me a little while to figure out that when you got off work at 10 p.m. on a Friday and you had to work the next day, it wasn't like time to go to the bar. So
Right.
after a couple months of like recalibrating post-college life, I did all right there for 2 years. I covered that stuff. I moved on to cover local government, started covering some more state politics. And then, something really that I have a lot of mixed feelings about happened. The Great Recession was setting in during this time. I got out of college in December of 2007. And so my
Okay.
first 2 years of work were '08 and '09. And the Great
Eesh.
Recession was hitting in. We saw the newsroom shrink. The things going on in the community outside the newsroom were even worse. I mean, people who were working for all kinds of major manufacturers and everything, losing jobs that were family supporting jobs. And so I started covering the Great Recession. I wrote a series called Surviving Hard Times. And I really valued the opportunity. I got to chance to tell some meaningful stories, but man, I really wish I hadn't come at the expense of so much economic devastation and heartache that was going on in that part of the state and in a lot of the country at the time.
Mm. And you were allowed that autonomy.
Yeah, yeah. It was a really rare opportunity because there was so much to cover, and it was such a small staff and an increasingly smaller staff because of what was happening with the recession. That a lot of it was like, we need someone to cover this, we need someone to cover that. So I covered court cases and government meetings and ambulance calls and all kinds of stuff. But when the recession really kind of came into its own, they wanted to devote time to it. I give a lot of credit to those editors, and they said, we'd like you to focus on this, and so they gave input, obviously, but it was, what was I hearing in the community? What were the big economic stories that we want to tell? So I told stories of dairy farms that were trying to fight from going under. I told stories of people who never expected to be at soup kitchens. I told stories of small businesses trying to make it work, and it was really meaningful. And you get me talking about it here. I mean, I guess I didn't realize how formative it really was because a lot of the work and writing I've done since, I guess, kind of goes back to that. But
I
yeah, I
was
hadn't thought
actually
about that
thinking
for a
about
while.
that, and I was gonna
Yeah.
bring that up when we got to that part. That it sounds a lot like what you were doing there is kind of what you're doing now,
Yeah.
and that was almost like foreshadowing.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know it at the time, but I was writing something that was really important, and it informed what I did next because as much as I loved where I was from, I felt like there was a little bit of a need to get out and see other parts of the world to kind of get a sense of things.
Yeah.
And I ended up moving to Nashville, Tennessee, and the job that I had there was for the Nashville Business Journal, and so I covered major in-depth economic stories, investigative stories, white collar crime, bank failures, all kinds of stuff
Sure.
in the home of country music, which I'm a country music fan, like a lot of people where we're from. And it was a really cool experience to go do something that was kind of a bigger city experience, but in a place that felt like home, because of the country music and some of the things that go on down
Oh,
there.
right. Yeah, I get it.
And,
I get it.
I continued the business and economic journalism there. So I guess, kind of Wausau really set me on that path in a way.
And how long were you in Nashville?
Yeah, I was in Nashville for 3 years. Had a great time, mostly working and drinking. I spent most of my time in a newsroom or in the honky tonks there, having a
Uh,
great time. I was 25, 26, 27.
yeah, it's called
Um,
20s. That's what,
yeah,
that's
that's
just
right.
saying.
Roaring 20s, that's what they're for.
Yeah.
So I was there for 3 years. And then after that is when I moved to DC. And I spent a lot of time going back and forth from DC to Tennessee, because I was working for a U.S. Senator there who had a great record of bipartisanship. Lamar Alexander,
Well,
did
so
a lot
now,
of things.
how did we go
Yeah.
from I'm writing to now I'm, what are you doing?
You're making me talk about myself. I'm uncomfortable, so I guess I'm speeding it up.
Well, that's
I
the whole idea behind this is to get to know you.
Fair
But yeah,
enough.
so yeah, what was that? How did this
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah, so I was covering politics, I was covering business, manufacturing, economics, banking sector, all that for the Nashville Business Journal.
Uh-huh.
And I was getting a chance to do a lot of things that are cool, for a farm boy who never imagined doing this stuff. So I guess maybe back up a little bit. The Great Recession was over at that point, but the recovery was sort of slow and bumpy. And what they were running into in Tennessee at that time was actually the biggest state by geography and population that hadn't had a bank failure in the Great Recession. So actually every single other state, right? All 49 other states at that point had some sort of a bank failure. And actually, I shouldn't say 49. A number of states hadn't, but Tennessee was the biggest one,
You got it.
that hadn't had a bank failure, to kind of correct my record there. And so I was covering what was going on here, and was there going to be a failure? And the banks there were healthier than a lot of other parts of the state, partially because of decisions that they'd made to have a higher amount of capital. So when you have a bank and you're going to lend, you got to have a certain amount of money in the bank, and then on that money is what you lend upon, right? That's your financial strength. And they had a little bit more capital than other banks, and so they were in a little bit better position. But it was a little bit inevitable. And I was writing about some of the more troubled banks. I had a lot of sources who worked at the banks or were affected by the banks, or whatever the case may be. And one day I got a call that was basically said, "Hey, there's this bank you've been watching. You might want to be down there this Friday afternoon." And what happens on Friday afternoons when there are troubled banks is that the FDIC comes in on a Friday afternoon. The FDIC, which insures all banks, and then there could be a state regulator or a federal regulator, and they come in on a Friday afternoon and they close the bank down and they work out what's going to happen to that bank over the weekend. And then on Monday, the bank opens back up, because the idea is, although those deposits are insured, that freaks people out because that's their money.
Mm,
And so you want to close it down over the weekend if you're in the position of these regulators, and open it back up on Monday in the hopes that people kind of just say, okay, well, the bank's under new ownership now. So what happens is these banks, sometimes they fail outright, sometimes they're bought in the process of that happening. But in one way or another, generally speaking, regulators try to facilitate some other bank owning that bank. So this was
got
going
it.
to happen on a Friday afternoon. So I drove down, and I had written the story about what was going to happen about the bank failing as much as we could, like real basic details in case the bank failed, so that we were ready to go.
Right.
And we
Yep.
wrote just the basic stuff we knew was right. And I was sitting there in the last intersection before I would turn left to go to this bank, and all of a sudden I saw the blueberries and cherries, in the rearview mirror. I thought, oh shit, I thought I was getting pulled over. And it's like, I got to get down there. I look up. Well, it's not one cop car; it's six cop cars, and I realized they're on their way to the bank. So the light turns green, and I take off through the intersection. And I actually beat the cop cars into the bank. So I'm driving my car, and the six cop cars that were coming behind. I pull into the parking lot. I turn around and I watch. Of course, I was a print reporter, so I didn't have a camera. I didn't think to use my phone in those days. All I had was a notepad. So my editor's like, "Did you get a picture?" I was like, "No, but I got a really good description in my notebook of these cop cars flying into the parking
What a
lot."
description.
and so I got a chance to write, the inside story of how that happened and how that rippled throughout the economy. I wrote about some people who got tangled up in some financial dealings that weren't good that ended up being part of federal investigations, things like that. They were really rare opportunities. And as I continued to do that, I started to get to know more and more people who were part of the government, and I got approached to see if I'd be willing to go to Washington D.C. to work on Capitol Hill. And journalism was still, my passion,
Mm.
and ultimately writing was really what it was all about. But going to work as a spokesman, a press secretary, and eventually a deputy communications director on Capitol Hill still allowed me to write and still allowed me to be involved in things, government news of the day. And so it was an exciting opportunity that I didn't really expect, but I thought I'd take. And so I took a little detour working in the policy world for a little bit as a result.
Did you ever think that when they asked you to do this, any trepidation there, any great opportunity, but I, I don't think I'll be good at this, or is that actually this is it's a different, it's under a different umbrella, but I'm doing a lot of the similar things. Was there any ever some doubt that I
Yeah.
thanks for the opportunity, but I'm not sure this. It's a big risk,
Since
and I don't know if I'm going to be any good at it.
that time, I think I've decided that reinventing now and then every couple years isn't a bad thing. And it doesn't mean you leave what you were or who you were or what you're doing. It just means that you find new ways to do things that you're trying to do. It's kind of like, maybe it's a farm thing. You're always looking for a way to put in a new crop. And for me, this was a really scary one. It was the first big opportunity where I was making that big of a change, and I was worried about leaving daily journalism. I was worried about stepping into the policy world, which involves politics. And next thing you know, one side and the other is shooting at the other, and it's just a different kind of thing. But working for Senator Alexander, like I said, he had a really proud bipartisan record. He was really focused on trying to solve problems, and so I thought, this is an opportunity to work with someone who's serious, whether I want to be in politics long term or not. As it turned out, I didn't want to be in politics long term. It was a couple years I worked on that, learned a lot. Glad I did. But I thought whether this is a lifelong thing or whether it's a couple year experience to learn for a writer from rural Wisconsin to learn another couple things about how the world works, I'll give it a shot. So I did that, and I
And,
worked on
and, and was
Capitol
that
Hill.
something where it's almost like you have to interview that person, or like this is just an opportunity? I don't care. We all like to think, or at least I like to think, that if I was approached to work on a campaign, which nobody in the right mind would ever ask me because I'd be terrible,
Watch
but I would
out.
have to believe in that candidate, right?
Yeah,
But I also get it's a job. Now you're not a
yeah,
a, a career. I don't know what that'd be called, but a person that's just on campaigns for 40 years, where it's just okay, and a
yeah,
lot of these people too. The next
right.
one, right? It's this person, and the next year it's this one, and then you just go from one to another. You don't really pick and choose a lot of the times because that's just your career. It's what you do. You're a political strategist, communications, whatever. Did
Yeah,
you kind of have to vet that person? Did you believe in that person, or you
yeah.
believed in the opportunity?
It's a great question. I think if you do it over a long enough period of time, it gets harder and harder. But there are people who made a career of working for people they believe in, and they're able to string that over the course of decades. For me, doing it a couple years, I really wanted to focus on trying to get it right and kind of not lose yourself along the way. There was a phrase on Capitol Hill. I don't know if they still use it. They used to call somebody a mechanic, and a mechanic was somebody who could work for anybody. They'd work on any car, so they'd work for any member of Congress.
I get it.
And that was never me. I wanted to make sure that I thought that, particularly with my first boss, but just generally, you want to work for good people. You want to work for people who, some of their big priorities or some of your big priorities. It's inevitable that they're going to do and say things that you agree with and you disagree with, because no two people agree. If you do, we're not thinking, right?
Mm-mm.
One of us is, I don't know, can't remember who said that, but it's is something that people told me at that time, and it was right. And so, you try to pick people who at that time are working on things that you think are interesting and important, and you understand that they're going to be doing and saying things that you agree with, doing and saying things you disagree with, and you try to focus on working for people who,
Sure.
big picture, you can feel good about. And in that way, it's not that different than whatever you do with your life. If you're working for a company, hopefully you don't think that they're doing something toxic and terrible and evil for the world. I mean, hopefully you feel like, hey, this is a product that's important, this is a service that's important, that kind of thing. And for me, it went back to my dad, which, when you grow up farming, it's not only your job, but it's your home,
It's your
it's your family,
family.
it's your,
It's
it's
yeah.
your culture, it's your way of life, it's your heritage. And so it's just always really important to me that I felt like I was doing something meaningful, because my dad and now my sister, That's what they do. And I wasn't cut out for it exactly, but I had a passion for that kind of thing, and I value where I'm from. So, trying to do something meaningful with the time that you've got with your work days, I think is important. And so, you don't want to make careless decisions just kind of floating from person to person in the political context,
Mhm.
but it's true for any job, I think.
And that makes a little more sense because my whole family has been in law enforcement. Dad was a sheriff for 28 years. Sister's in the FBI. Uncle has been in just about everything, but he's in the Chicago metro area for over 40 years. Brother's chief of police. So all law enforcement. But it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But now I think about it. All of our original articles on DrydenWire, at least one a day, is crime and court related stories because
Yeah.
these are stories that we're not trying to put like the alleged bad guys on blast. It really is it's showing the successes of our law enforcement. Because
Yeah.
so that's interesting that you brought that up. I never kind of connected those dots. Yeah, that's still kind of how I was raised, and what that was important, and it was law enforcement. And even though I didn't go into it, I still have those values, and I still
Yeah.
appreciate that world and that life. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
It's funny because we've never talked about that, but I can see the parallel. And when I got into journalism, and then I worked in public policy, and then after that, as I got into other types of consulting, and now with the writing that I do in addition to that consulting, all of it has been about trying to use the skills that you have to try to do right by where you're from. At least that's what it
Hmm.
is for me. So if
Wow.
you're highlighting what law enforcement's doing and talking about those stories in the community, that's similar for me. Where I thought I maybe wasn't cut out for farming, but I love where I'm from. I love my roots. What can I do? And so with journalism, the times that I was, most animated by what I was doing was when I was telling those economic stories, particularly of
Yeah.
rural parts of the state. Um, when I was working in policy, it was, what can we do for rural America? Now, when I work for my consulting day job, those opportunities, those clients and projects where we're doing something for the economy of Wisconsin or the Midwest or other parts of the country. And then with my column writing, whenever I get a chance to tell a story that's really close to my roots, that's what's meaningful to me. So, some people do the things and some people tell about the things. And I guess, you and I are those kinds of people.
That's
So
fascinating. All right, so let's catch back up here real quick. You were now what 2-3 years in DC.
yeah, yeah.
Then what?
Yeah, so about 2.5, 3 years in DC.
Uh-huh.
Came back to Wisconsin to work for campaigns. That's when you and I got to know each other.
Got it.
So worked on U.S. Senate campaigns, governor campaigns, and by that time I was so happy to be back in Wisconsin, and this was an opportunity to kind of take the career I'd built and kind of plant it back home.
Sure.
And I was really really happy about that. But my time in politics was limited just because I knew I didn't want to do that for my whole life. It was a really consuming job. Farming, you work every single day. You're up early. You're working late. That's always going to be a little bit of who I am. But man, working in that political churn is just something that you can only do for
I've
so
gotten to
long.
know, and a lot of people that I know,
Yeah. Right.
and I see that
Yeah.
it like sucks the life out of them.
Yeah.
No kidding. I'm not saying politics or anything like that does. I'm just saying the people that I know that are on campaign. And when it's over, I mean, they take it personally. If I
Yeah.
recall, one of our conversations we had, and I don't want to get into too much private information here, so tell me to stop or whatever. I'll just kind of gloss or just
I'll
I'll be
use my
ambiguous as
swear word as a
possible.
danger word.
When that campaign that I first got to know you on, when that candidate lost,
Yeah.
I think you left for a while. I think you got out of here for a while, and I recall thinking that really impacted you.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
don't know if we ever really had a follow up conversation to that, so I guess we are right now.
Yeah.
Was that
Yeah.
accurate? That felt that really impacted you, and I don't know what
Yeah.
that was because oh my guy lost, and I'm taking it hard. I didn't feel like it was that. There was something else. What was that?
Yeah, you put so much into something, and then when it doesn't happen, you feel like you've let people down. You feel, the candidate for sure, but you feel like you've let your family down, or you've let where you're from down if you think that that person was going to do something meaningful for your local community, or cared about people like where you're from and that kind of thing. And so that's hard. And in Wisconsin, it's battleground races. That was a 1 point race. The wind blew in a slightly different direction. It could have turned out differently, and I could go on and on for years about what happened there. But these races blow by 1 point, 2 points, one direction or another. And yeah. So after that happened, I mean, I stayed in Wisconsin, but I did have to get out for a little bit. My wife and I went for first vacation I'd had in years. We went down to Mexico together, and I shaved my beard, which tells you what kind of vision quest I was on. She's the only person who has a photo of that, to my knowledge, unless it's been spread around. We'll see if it comes out after this.
Yeah.
And we just kind of recharged, hung out with her parents for a week after that, came back to Wisconsin, got back to work, and I couldn't value more the years since then. Working for our company, Platform Communications, which doesn't
Yeah,
do
so that's
campaign.
what started after you
Yeah,
get
yep,
back and decide, I don't think I'm going to
yep.
be on campaigns anymore.
Yeah, it had started. The company had started in 2017. Started by Keith Jokes, our chairman and CEO, and I had been working a little bit with Keith through my own company, and then I started working with Platform. I came on part time, and the campaigns. He was also involved with the governor, and so I kind of went out to help out with that effort, and then came back to the company after the campaign. And I'd been helping to build the company beforehand, and it was fun to be able to help build that company beforehand and build the company in the years since. Keith saw a need and he assembled some people that he thought could help him fill that need. And so now we get the chance to work on all kinds of things.
Yeah, that blew
Totally
up. I
on.
mean, it totally
Yeah,
did. I mean, it grew so
yeah,
fast. And for people who don't know, what is the kind of the overview of what platform communication does?
yeah, absolutely. So Platform Communications helps solve problems. We are a communications company, a public affairs company, and what we do is we help people, organizations, companies communicate around their issues to help try to solve problems. And so that can be a wide range of things. That can be private sector companies, so it can be public relations for companies for in the private sector. That can also mean industry associations that are advocating for a certain type of industry. That can mean an issue advocacy organization that's advocating on a particular issue in the Capitol. That can mean a nonprofit. That can mean educational organizations. We've worked for the whole gamut. And
Wow.
so what we do now isn't necessarily focused on just one part of the political spectrum or another, but what we're focused on is trying to solve problems. And we try to work for quality people and quality organizations who have real problems. And we work to solve those problems by writing for them, which is the part that I really enjoy, by helping them formulate strategy for an issue going on in the media, whatever it may be. We work with the media. We do ad campaigns and marketing, both traditional and digital. We do a lot of coalition building and stakeholder management, try to help organizations that are trying to make something happen, public policy wise or otherwise, to build support. So whether it's public relations and helping with writing and dealing with the press, or whether it's ad campaigns, or whether it's public affairs work where we're trying to build coalitions, build support. What we try to do is we try to be there to help organizations solve problems. And what animates me about it, in addition to the fact that I still get to write and kind of be part of the battle of ideas, the marketplace of ideas, the battle over words, that kind of stuff that really gets me going. We get to help our home state and we get to help the Midwest. A lot of our clients have a big impact on what's going on in the economy or in local communities, and we try to work with people who are doing things we think are worthwhile.
And we actually have a relationship with the platform. There's several people that are down there that I communicate with, and Alex Zimmerman. And I just actually recently found out Ben Vogel. You and I both know Ben. I think his wife works there too, which I literally
Yeah,
just found that out. I'm like, and I don't know what she does there or anything. And there's a
yeah,
few others like an Evan, but they have been fantastic, by the way. Like they'll send information, and like we do even just most recently, I think it's the third Thursday, the last Thursday of the month. They send the housing report or
yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. So we kind of work together on that. No, they've been absolutely fantastic. So everything's
I,
going
I
wonderful. You're at platform. Everything's going great, and you're not. I mean, you're still there. You're right,
yeah,
but
yep,
that's not your
yeah. No,
full time
well,
gig anymore.
yeah. So it's my full time gig, and then I've got other half-time gigs on
Oh,
top
okay,
of
so
it,
that
just
still is the
to kind
full
of keep
time
busy.
gig.
It is, yeah, it is. Thanks, first of all, for what you said about our team.
Oh,
Aaron
they're
Volkel, Alex Zimmerman. These people are some of the best communicators in the state, and we're happy to have them. For me, it's still my full time job. I'm still enjoying what I'm doing, but I also have been working to build on the side a writing career that can harken back to some of the
going
journalism and
back to your essentially your
yeah,
roots.
yeah, and so I've been doing that really all along. I mean, even when I was working in these jobs that were all consuming, I was always writing on the side. I was always working on book ideas and things like that. And what I've been able to do in the last couple of years is I've been privileged to be able to start writing about my roots. So I have been able to tell hidden stories of rural America based here in Wisconsin, but they're universal. I've found in a lot of ways. I started writing about our farm as our family farm was struggling to continue with milking cows with the size that we were. I've written about that. I've written about issues that rural voters care about. I've written about the rural drug crisis, and I've had the chance to really do that. Right now, I'm doing it for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, but I've had the opportunity that's really humbling to me to write for places like Newsweek, PBS, and Wisconsin Public Radio's Wisconsin Life, outdoor magazines across the country. Just I've found that there are places that are interested in those stories of rural areas and what they're dealing with. And so what it's been fun to do is take that knowledge that I had the chance to build up in journalism and in the policy world, and then marry that with my roots. And so I try to tell stories that are important from a public standpoint, but that tie back to, that place where I'm from, and try to weave those things together. And, it's easy to feel like Wisconsin and the Midwest can be overlooked sometimes. And, it's felt really good to be able to tell those
So,
stories.
sure.
So
Now, when you say rural areas, so I can only speak to rural Northwest Wisconsin, but
yeah,
I'm sure there's multiple rural areas across Wisconsin. Do you find the same issues in? We'll stick to Wisconsin that are in rural northwestern Wisconsin are the same issues as a rural northeastern or southwestern or central? Is it like rural's rural, or right, or is it there some pretty contrasting differences?
yeah. It's a really good question, and the answer is a little bit of all of the above. And what I mean by that is every local community is unique. Every community has its own opportunities and challenges. There are some things that are, I think, common that you see in rural areas, and you see them, and we see them. The column I did for the Journal Sentinel earlier this year on the rural drug crisis is one of them, where people and communities are all different, but one of the things that's been going on is there's a growing rural drug crisis that is a little bit beneath the surface, because in the cities it's out there in the wide open. In the suburbs it's talked about a little bit less, but people also have money and availability and accessibility to treatment. In the rural areas, you don't
Yeah.
necessarily have the attention and the resources, and so it's kind of a little bit beneath the surface there. And so there's things like that, I think, that a lot of rural communities deal with, where people don't necessarily
Yeah.
understand the depth of the problem. And then same thing with economic things and other stuff.
So Fitz and I, Sheriff Fitzgerald, when he comes on for our weekly show, we've been talking about that for the last couple 3 years. Is the drug? I mean, it's
Yeah.
that wasn't going away. We were talking about meth like 3 years ago, saying like this is the number one thing right now. And in southern
Yeah.
Wisconsin, I think it was heroin. I think
Yep.
it was heroin in southern Wisconsin, but
Yep.
up here it was just all meth. And
Yep.
something he had said that was fascinating to me, because when Dad was a sheriff, that was the first time I ever heard. It was like 20 years ago when I was young. He had said something about they busted a meth house, something, whatever.
Yeah.
They used to like make meth. And
Yeah.
it was fascinating. This is a few years ago. Fitzy had said, it's well, a lot of that, people just make it around here. He goes, nope. Funny thing is, nope, not anymore. I'm like, what? I remember that Dad was
Ship
saying
it
that
in.
there was, he goes, no, 0% of the meth in Barron County and Washburn and Burnett and Sawyer, 0% is made here. It's all
Yep.
coming from, and this was not a political thing, so nobody take it that way. It's just, it gets made somewhere else and it comes up likely through Mexico. But again, this is not I don't want to be a political thing. It's just the point is,
Yeah.
eventually it comes to the cities, which then comes over to Wisconsin, but none of it was made here, which I
Yeah.
thought was so fascinating. I just assumed that, that's how it works. Come to find
Yeah.
out it isn't.
You'll still find people who will every now and then blow up a trailer making meth.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it is people. The drug trade has become so widespread and sophisticated, and the ability to move drugs between Chicago and the Twin Cities, and all, like where I'm from, Sauk County is a little bit of a crossroads between those areas as far as the highways are concerned. And so the movement of drugs is really rampant through our rural communities, just like it would be in a city. And you're right about meth; it's brought in. And the other thing that's happening is in these rural communities, it's expanding more types of drugs. So heroin,
Now it's
you've got
fentanyl, to be
fentanyl,
honest. In our area, now it's fentanyl getting into
totally.
everything else, and it is just that is now taking on a life of its own.
And the thing about fentanyl is that it gets mixed with heroin and other drugs. It's sort of part of the cocktail, and it's the
Right.
deadly part of that cocktail.
Yeah. So when you decide, first of all, how often do you write? Do you have like a weekly or a monthly thing with the Journal Sentinel?
Yeah, so I do a quarterly column. It's in depth. We do a couple thousand words on an issue. So I do those quarterly, and then I write for other places as I'm able. And this is why I'm up early in the morning, like you, working on that stuff before we get cooking at
And is
platform.
there like a? I'm sure you maybe you don't. Is there a spot that if somebody literally just wanted to see your stuff, do you have like a here's a links to all the places that I've you can read an
Yeah,
article at this place? Do you have like a social media account for that or something or a website?
yeah, yep. They can check me out on Twitter at Brian J Reisinger. That's Brian J as in James Reisinger REI and then Singer Singer. Or they can check the Journal Sentinel columns out at jsonline.com under the Ideas Lab where they've got
Ideas
voices from
Lab.
a lot of different places. And I'm
Okay.
I'm happy that they wanted to have a rural voice on there.
Yeah, we ran one of your stories. So it was after you put it in the Journal Sentinel, and then we put in this article was first published on, and then with a link back to them. And we ran one of those, and it went really well. I think that was I think it was about the drug,
Yeah. Yep.
if I recall.
Yeah. I think
Um,
that's right. So
yeah. So
it's. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, please.
I was just saying it's an interesting thing, so I've had the chance in the last couple of months to do something a little unique I didn't expect, which is to see the rural versus the urban. So my wife is from Northern California, and a couple months ago, as you know, we moved to Northern California. We live in a small town. I tell people it's up in the hills. It's more like living in Baraboo than anything, but we're
Sure.
about 20, 30 minutes from Oakland and San Francisco. And I live part of my time in Northern California in our small town here with my wife near her family. And then I split my time with part of that back in Wisconsin, going back to the family farm. And when I'm in Wisconsin, I spend that time, remaining in touch with what's going on at work at Platform, working on my writing, doing research, and spending time with family. And it's a chance for the first time since I was 18 to live on the farm with my parents. And that's the only way I can
When you
do
go
this because
back, you stay at the
yeah,
farm.
yeah, because we
I
can, we can
see.
barely afford one place in
Well,
in California, even a small town in California,
hey,
let
man,
alone
that
two.
writing business is really paying off.
Yeah,
I
but the
see.
reason I bring it up is because it's been a really interesting, unexpected, unique opportunity in life to live on the farm when I'm back in Wisconsin, live in Northern California, albeit in a small town, but near some of these urban areas, and to be able to see different walks of life. And what you see as you do that is that the rural urban divide isn't really quite as wide as it feels. There's a lot of challenges that people face that are similar, and we've got a lot more in common than we have in different. But it's been an interesting opportunity to see that I didn't expect.
Do you miss at all when you see well, Governor Evers signed the budget yesterday in Wisconsin, 50 or 51 vetoes. So there's a lot to unpack there that we won't get into on this show. But when you see this stuff, do you miss it? Do you think, man, I could really be a part of something to make a difference here? Or is it I don't pay attention? Or if I do see it, I'm like, don't care, turn the channel.
Yeah, I pay attention to the degree that I need to, either for our clients at Platform or for issues that I'm writing about, to the degree that public policy is part of those issues. Sometimes they
I
are,
see.
sometimes they aren't. I don't miss the runaround and the rat race of that type of work. It was about 5 years in what's been so far a 20-year career, 10 in journalism, 5 in public policy, 5 now in consulting and writing. And there's an excitement to it. It has an impact, and that's important. But there's a lot of ways to contribute to what's going on in the public arena, and I'm happy to be doing it with my day job and with our writing now, as much as I was doing anything else.
Well, speaking of California, they're in the news like a lot, and
Yeah,
usually not for good things. um, Homelessness, drugs,
yeah,
woke DAs, or whatever people refer to. I don't even know what wokeism stands for. I just don't care. But there's a lot of stuff happening, and I've even heard like San Francisco. Read San Francisco is just
yeah,
for a number of reasons. You are 30 minutes from there. Do
yeah.
you see or hear that stuff? Is it as bad
Yeah,
as what the news is saying that it is?
It's interesting. I always say that California is many states in one. There's parts of it that are like Wisconsin. There's parts of it that are like Texas. There's parts of it that are like
Right.
Nevada. And then there's parts of it that are the San Francisco and the LAs and stuff like that you hear about. Um, you know, when I think about those kinds of things, I just think about the wide range of people who live in any particular place and how it's so much more complex than you ever realize. There's no bones about it. A place like San Francisco has challenges. They've got drug issues. They have homelessness issues. They have crime issues, and there's a lot of people who have been here for a long time who say that there's things need to be done about that. There's also a lot of good in those places and a lot of wonderful people and unique experiences. For me, what I've found, like I say, it's like living in Baraboo or Portage or Rhinelander. It's a good sized town, and I'm shocked by how much it feels like Wisconsin. And I say that just because it speaks to how much we all have in common. Now, our town of Moraga, we're about 30 minutes from Oakland and San Francisco, up in what they call the Oakland Hills. So we're surrounded by hills, and we're surrounded by a little bit more outdoors than people who live closer to the city. But we hear the wild turkeys in the morning, and we hear the coyotes at night, just like my family does at home. And there's people here who have a lot of similar experiences and different experiences, and you learn from those people. But my dad and mom were here a couple weeks ago, and we drove north and we went through farm country, and what we found was farms that were going under or being sold, just like farms in Wisconsin. And we met a dairy farmer who had experience just like my dad's, and they could have been neighbors, but they're actually 2,000 miles apart. And so it is cool to see things like that and discover stuff like that you never would have expected.
Well, as we talked earlier, I'd asked you, is rural North Wisconsin different than other parts of rural in other parts of Wisconsin? You said they're each has, obviously they're all unique, but there's a lot of similarities there. But that really brings it full circle in terms of, we're talking about a rural-ish area in California. Isn't that much different than rural Northwest Wisconsin?
Yeah. It's amazing.
Rural's rural.
That's right. And that's why I say that, the things that are being dealt with in rural America, in some cases, they're thousands of miles away from the people who don't know about it. In some cases, they're just a couple miles away from people who don't know about it. And it's just as easy to be in a bubble in Madison or Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as it is in San Francisco, California. And it's just as easy in a rural part of California as it is in a rural part of Wisconsin, feel isolated from that stuff. But if we get these stories out there and we tell these stories, and people who are in urban and rural areas understand a little bit more about what's going on in the other person's world, you can solve a lot of problems that way.
Yeah, and this is like I don't know if it was like Us Weekly or something else. I dated a girl, and it was years ago, obviously. I can't remember, Us Weekly People or something, and it was like, celebrities are just like you. It was something like that, right? And it was like just a celebrity. Like at the time, Michael Jackson was still alive, and he was like shopping or something. It's what? So it's kind of like that. It's like, what? Northern California rural is just like us here. When that is interesting that you could actually get to see both sides of that. So what story are you working on now? Have you already what's your last story you did? Where can people find it? And what are you working on next?
Yeah, the most recent one that published was on the rural drug crisis, and that was on jsonline.com at the Ideas Lab. The next one I've got coming out is also JS Online at the Ideas Lab, and that's going to be about failing farms, our disappearing farms in Wisconsin, what's happening. And, what I talk about there is there are economic and social reasons and cultural reasons, all kinds of things that are making it more and more difficult for our farms to make it. But also the thing that a lot of people don't realize, if they don't live it, is that when a farm goes under, there's usually some sort of a personal tragedy associated with it as well. And on our farm, we had a fire that my sister thankfully caught early, and we were able to get it out. And our farm was able to make it, but it could have been devastating. And so when you have farms that are on the edge, a lot of times it might be a fire or someone getting sick or someone dying in a tragic farm accident, or the loss of some animals, or a bad crop. And that's a tragedy for that family. And it's also a thing that can push a farm over the edge from, being close to going under to going under.
Yeah, I could see, like, if you're farmed your whole life, your kids don't want to go into it, you and your significant other are in your 70s, you've put, squirreled money away, you're ready to retire, so this small farm goes up fine.
Yep.
But it sounds like you're also saying, like, what if you're in your 40s and the farm goes under? That's all you've done your whole life.
Yep.
What do you do?
Yep. And what do you do after that?
Right.
For a job, but
that's also, what I mean. Like, then you got another 30 years and work for it. What are you going to do? Like, this is all I know.
Totally. And the thing about farming too is, like we were saying, it's not only your job, it's your family, it's where you're from, it's your life, it's your heritage. And so, when for us keeping the farm going, which thankfully my dad has done for years and my sister's taking over from him, and when I go back and live there for part of my time and get to write about that, it's so rewarding to have. And I can't imagine, and we've had times where we've been afraid of losing it. And when you're afraid of losing that, it's not only, dad would lose a job if that were to happen, but you lose kind of who you are along the way, or at least it feels that way. And it's really hard for people to deal with that. And so I always empathize with those people who've had that kind of loss.
Do you happen to know, or a ballpark, it doesn't have to be specific, what percentage farms are now owned? I believe the correct way of saying is corporate owned, or just non, just family owned? Because I think that number, it's getting larger and larger in between those two. I had heard something like well over 90%, but I'm not sure if that's accurate. Do you happen to know?
You know what's interesting? There are many, many, many more farms that are much larger than they used to be. And it is true that there are more corporate farms, but the majority of farms, particularly in Wisconsin, but in many parts of the country, but especially in Wisconsin, are still family owned. And so a lot of those farms, they're small farms. There's much bigger farms. They might look like they must be owned by a corporation, but they're actually owned by a family that's trying to pay for their health insurance and trying to pay for
Sure.
their workers' wages and all those things. So they're bigger. But at least in Wisconsin, I can't speak for every single state, but a lot of parts of the country, and for sure in Wisconsin, most of our farms are actually still family owned.
All right. To kind of put a bow on this, do you, what is the state of small farm, family-owned farms in Wisconsin? Are they in what you believe to be a good place, with the exception of tragedies and things that happen? But I mean, are they? We're doing enough in our legislators doing enough, and our community supporting, and they're making. I mean, is it a good place? What is the state of farms,
Yeah.
small family farms in Wisconsin right now?
Yeah, it's tough, but it's not over, is what I like to say. I mean, there
Oh,
have been a lot of national headlines about the number of farm failures, and people assume that it's all kind of withering. And there's a lot going on in Wisconsin agriculture and other parts of the country as well. That's still good, and we still have a lot of family farms in Wisconsin. There's still a lot of milk being produced to create a lot of cheese, and there's also a lot of other farming being experimented with. Where we're really at in terms of how things have changed is for a long time, Wisconsin had small, medium, and large size farms, family farms of all sizes and varieties that were producing a lot of milk. And milk has changed. That market has changed to the point that you got to be pretty big to be able to make it, bigger than you used to be able to make it. But we still have a lot of farms. There's a lot of bigger farms. There's still some small farms. A lot of those medium sized farms in the middle have gone away. But you got bigger farms that are still doing dairy. And then you got smaller farms that are doing all kinds of different things. Our farm, which was a 50 cow dairy, we sold our herd in spring of 2021. That was a really hard thing to do, but we did it at a point in time and with enough freedom from debt. Didn't have major debt, things like that, where we're able to transition to a new model. So what our farmers doing is raising heifers for other larger dairy farms, raising beef for the open market, and raising cash crops, so corn and hay and soybeans, some of which
so
feeds our animals and
you
some
had
of
to
which we
adjust a
sell.
little bit.
We've adjusted, and there's a lot of small farms that maybe they've got a diversified business model like ours does, like my sister and dad have been transitioning toward. Maybe they've got a niche product. You see people experimenting with all kinds of different crops, different things. So the reason I say it's tough, but it's not over, is because we've lost a lot of farms, but there's also a lot of opportunity for farms to figure out what they can do next. And the resilience of rural areas is something that you
Oh,
don't
you
understand
can't.
unless you've lived in it.
100%.
And that lasts, that'll last all the way until the last farm closes its doors, which I think is a very long way away, and hopefully never.
Well, we see that when like a Walmart or a Menards, and I'm not banging on a Walmart or Menards or anything like that. I'm saying when that comes in, a lot of people say, let's say in a rural area, there's a discussion. And you know how that goes. Discussion is just mean everybody around town starts talking and ripping anything like, no, we don't want a Walmart coming in here. And think of all these small businesses that go out of business. Well, let's say it's, I don't know, a big hardware store chain. I don't know if there's such a thing, but like a Menards. Sure, we'll just say that. Or a Home Depot. Well, your local Ace Hardware, your True Value, or your local mom and pop thing, they're going to go out of business. Well, thing is, like, they don't actually, all the bigger ones, they don't do snowblower repairs, or they're not experts on things, because that's how they keep the workforce, that's how it makes sense financially, is you're no
Yeah,
longer an expert. Like, I went to Best Buy and asking someone about home theater and this receiver, and I needed a special cord to get it plugged into the subwoofer, and they're like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? What do I mean? You work in the home theater department. How do you not know that this exists? Like, well, everything we sell, it all comes together. So
right.
they don't even know, but they're not required to know anymore. So yeah, you have to adjust a little bit,
Yep.
but you can find a niche in there somewhere. I'm not advocating for or against a big, box store coming into rural areas, but if it does, I look at that. There's an opportunity that you could do something. What do they do, or more importantly, what don't they do? And then we should do that.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's a
Wherever
tough
there's
sell.
people,
I
there's
get it.
ideas, and wherever there's ideas, there's hope, and we'll figure it out.
I
So,
get it. Brian, thank you so much. You should come on a lot more often. When is your next story coming out?
should be coming out in the next couple weeks. So we will keep you posted.
Yeah, man, that was so much fun. I'm so happy that you
Loved
came
it.
on.
Oh man, I appreciate you having me. I'd love to be back.
All right, cool. All right. Thanks, everyone. A special thank you to Wisconsin farm boy, writer, and consultant who tells the hidden stories of rural America in columns for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and other publications across the country, Brian Reisinger, for taking the time to come on for a chat with us today. I will see you right back here on Tuesday when Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald and I will be back for our latest episode of Positive Tuesday with Ben and Fitzy. So until then, for DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden saying thank you for watching and have a blessed day.